There is no ancient word for insane, no Greek term, no Latin equivalent, no Sumerian inscription. Our ancestors had no word for it, but they absolutely had the problem, and the way they handled it was nothing like treatment, nothing like mercy, and sometimes nothing like what we'd call human, because without a word for madness, there was no framework for it. Only fear, and fear across every ancient civilization produced the same three responses, ones that will genuinely disturb you. In the next 8 minutes, you'll learn exactly what those three responses were, and which one quietly survived into modern psychiatry. Let's start with a body, not a metaphor. An actual body, a man found in northern Iraq, dead for roughly 45,000 years. His right arm had been amputated above the elbow. He was blind in one eye. His legs showed years of degeneration and pain. By every prehistoric survival standard, he should have died young. He didn't. He lived to old age. Someone fed him, protected him, kept him alive through winters he could not have survived alone. And this was not a farming civilization with extra food. Every calorie mattered. Now ask the harder question, what happened when it wasn't the body that broke? Because mental illness is not modern, the human brain has been capable of turning against itself for as long as humans have existed. Schizophrenia appears in every population ever studied, across every century and culture, roughly 1 in 100 people, which means that around ancient fires, tens of thousands of years ago, there was almost certainly someone hearing voices nobody else could hear, seeing things nobody else could see. Losing their grip on shared reality, the old assumption was simple. They were abandoned, but archaeology keeps refusing to support that idea. In Morocco, researchers found the remains of a woman who lived around 100,000 years ago. She likely suffered severe cognitive impairment from birth. She still survived into adulthood. In Atapuerca, Spain, researchers found the skull of a child from roughly 430,000 years ago with craniosynostosis, a condition that compresses the developing brain and causes obvious neurological problems. The child survived years longer than expected. Again and again, the bones tell the same story. People who should not have survived did. Someone stayed. But caring for a broken body is one thing. Caring for a fractured mind is something else entirely. A missing hand is understandable. A person speaking to invisible voices is frightening. Ancient humans needed an explanation, and almost everywhere they found the same one. The person whose mind worked differently was not broken. They were connected. The voices were messages. The visions were signs. The separation from ordinary reality was not a malfunction, but a doorway to spirits, ancestors, gods, or unseen forces. What we would now diagnose as psychosis was often treated as spiritual power. We have a name for this figure: shaman. The word comes from Siberia, but the role appears on nearly every continent. A person who stood between worlds, who heard what others could not hear, who frightened people and guided them at the same time. Modern researchers have long noticed the overlap between shamans and severe mental illness, visions, dissociation, hearing voices, altered states. What psychiatry calls symptoms, ancient societies often called a calling. And culture changes suffering more than most people realize. In 2015, researchers studying psychotic experiences in Ghana, Vietnam, and the United States found something striking. In Ghana and Vietnam, many people described the voices they heard as meaningful. Ancestors, spirits, even God. In the United States, the voices were usually described as hostile and terrifying, same neurological condition, different cultural story. Ancient cultures often told a story in which the person experiencing madness still had value. That does not mean the ancient world was gentle. It wasn't. Trepanation, drilling holes into the skull, is one of the oldest surgeries in human history. Many researchers believe some procedures were attempts to release evil spirits believed to cause madness. But the skulls often show healing. The patients survived, someone cared for them afterward. As civilizations developed writing, the evidence became clearer. The Egyptian Ebers Papyrus, written around 1550 BCE, describes what sounds remarkably like severe depression, heaviness, darkness of the heart, and recommends treatment rather than punishment. Then came Hippocrates. In the 5th century BCE, he argued that mental illness was not supernatural. It came from the brain. 2,000 years before modern neuroscience, he described depression, mania, and even conditions resembling postpartum psychosis. He believed sufferers deserved care, rest, structure, and treatment. But ancient societies never fully agreed. Plato wrote that madness, sent by the gods, could be greater than ordinary sanity. The Oracle of Delphi, one of the most respected voices in the ancient world, likely existed in an altered neurological state. Outside the temple, it may have been called illness. Inside the temple, kings traveled across continents to hear her speak. Rome later built some of the first institutions for the mentally ill. Places intended for care, not punishment. But Rome also introduced legal concepts declaring some people mentally incapable of managing their own lives. The tension between care and control began early. Then came the Middle Ages. The supernatural explanation returned with force. Madness became possession. Exorcisms replaced medicine. Isolation, starvation, and physical suffering were often justified as ways to drive demons out. Some monasteries still offered shelter and food, but fear dominated the system. And fear rarely produces compassion. In 705 CE, Baghdad opened what many historians consider the world's first psychiatric hospital. Islamic physicians classified mental illnesses, debated causes, and argued that mental illness came from the brain rather than the soul. While much of Europe treated madness as spiritual corruption, parts of the Islamic world approached it as medicine. Europe eventually opened its own psychiatric institutions, but many became infamous. Bedlam Royal Hospital in London, Bedlam, became a spectacle. People paid money to walk through the halls and stare at patients for entertainment. It took reformers like Philippe Pinel, Dorothea Dix, and William Tuke to challenge the cruelty. They argued that the mentally ill were not monsters or moral failures, but human beings suffering from conditions medicine still barely understood. And the argument still is not over. Mental health care remains underfunded across much of the world. Stigma still exists. We still debate how much society owes people whose minds no longer function in ordinary ways. But return to that grave in northern Iraq, the one-armed man who survived because somebody kept feeding him. We do not know what his people believed about suffering. We do not know how they explained illness. We only know they stayed. The oldest evidence of human compassion is not art or religion. It is a vulnerable person surviving because others refused to abandon them. That instinct has existed alongside fear and cruelty for as long as humans have existed. The question is whether we still choose it, whether we are willing to look at the person whose mind has broken, as minds have broken for tens of thousands of years, and do what those ancient humans did without medicine, psychology, or philosophy. Feed them, stay.